how we can encapsulate the business workflow in the REST API in order to have the power to guide our consumers through the workflow of our domain. So it's a very interesting topic. I mean, I write REST APIs. Everybody around me writes REST APIs, but the whole best practices around writing good REST APIs are continuously evolving, and this topic is really interesting in that aspect. And to talk about this, we have a great speaker. We have Julian Topsu. He is a tech coach and a public speaker. He is also a OWASP Foundation member and a Crafts Record founder. He is a tech coach, who predominantly supports CTOs, developers, and companies, and driving culture changes and adoption of practices like domain-driven design. We'll talk about that in today's webinar: software craftsmanship, DevOps, Agile, and application security. And he really worked in the trenches of software development, having worked at companies like Expedia, where he built world-class applications that kind of scale to millions of users. So really, a great privilege to have him talk to us today. So Julian, thanks a lot for taking the time out. Over to you.
Yeah, I will start with a little introduction. Hello, everyone. I know that you're coming from very far to find some answers about a really common issue we have regarding architecture on the web. So I will start by summing up what's the problem. So basically, when we create applications, we put our business logic in backends. So we think that this is a best practice because we don't want that business logic to be duplicated on all the consumers of our backends. They can be responsive single page applications and can be mobile application, desktop application, and so on. So we gather everything in the same place in the backend. So here, I modeled a backend on a business which is a booking rail system. And here you have several features such as performing a search for train going to your destination, selecting a train with the fare, etc. And because we don't put people in front of our backends, our users, they don't speak JSON, right? We also have to develop frontends on which we will find also our feature there. And the thing is, usually those features, we will express it with all the power of the natural language using words from the business. But because the front end and the back end are on both sides of the network, we have to use something to make them work together. And the main thing we have is what we call REST. So REST, it's a protocol between the backend and the front end. But the problem is that REST only have 4 words of vocabulary. So it means that each time you develop a feature, which is present in the backend and in the front end, you will have to translate that feature into those 4 words of vocabulary, which are create, read, update, delete. So for example, perform a search for train going to your destination. You may map it as a create search resource, which is that will be on the backend translated back to perform a search. Another example, if you want to select a train with a fare, maybe you can say regarding REST that this is an update of a sub-resource selection inside a search resources. And basically, this is arbitrary because we could have said, in that case, we will also create a selection resource. So you can see here that because of REST, we will have to do that translation in one way and translate it back in another way. So we can ask ourselves if we are not mad to do such things, because, you know, what wants to do the user is he wants to search for trains going to his destination, but he never asks you to create a search resource. But this is basically what you will expose as a web API. You don't expose exactly his intent. You expose the CRUD on the resource. This is what is saying REST. And I'm pretty sure that if you have some user stories to develop, you rather like it to look like the first sentence and not the second one. Because as you can see, there we have losing some information in the second sentence. We no longer have the notion of train, of destination. We don't have exactly the intent of the user. So here we have what we call an impedance mismatch. But why do we have that? So it comes from what we call the uniform interface. So uniform interface is one of the pillars of REST. So you have to know that before 2000, when we have to call some backends on the web, the only thing we had was HTTP. But the way to use HTTP was quite custom regarding according to the backend we were calling. So that was a real mess. And REST came and said, okay, now we will uniform all the things, and we will say that on each backend we will have now resources, and those resources will be able to handle their life cycle using the CRUD, on which we will map the HTTP method. So for example, if you want to create a resource, it will be a post. If you want to read a resource, it will be a get, update, it's patch or put, and delete is delete. So that was one of the main things that REST brought to us. But it has a big counterpart. And this is something that was documented by Rod Fielding himself. So the guy who invented REST, when he did his thesis, because it was a thesis, REST in fact, he said that the trade-off of the uniform interface is that it degrades the efficiency of the system, since the information is transferred in a standardized form rather than one which is specific to an application's needs. And this is typically what we saw on the previous slide. We are losing some information because of that uniform interface. So if here you model your business intent as the astronaut here, and the uniform interface of REST like the black hole in the back. So the uniform interface totally swallows all the business intent, and we just have CRUD APIs, right? And this is something that is a big disadvantage regarding REST. So I didn't introduce myself. My name is Julien Topsu. I'm a technical coach at Shodo, which is a French consultancy company. And here today, I will show you how we can bring back all the power of the business inside our REST API and no longer be prisoners of the CRUD paradigm. So to show you how we can do that, I have developed a little application of which I have applied that ancient technique. I will show you. So basically, you will see that it really looks like, sorry, it's there. Oh. So it really looks like, sorry, I don't remember where I stopped my demonstration. Okay, so let's go there. It should be there. Up. Okay, sorry for that. So you will see that this is a little application that will help you to make some travel to the moon, okay, using space train. So it really looks like what you may know when you are booking trains, by the way. So here you have a search form and you can specify if you want to do a one-way or round trip. You have to select your departure spaceport, for example, Cape Canaveral in America, going on Mare Cognitum on the moon. If you hit the search button, you will have the list of outbound space trains. So going from the Earth to the moon. So for each space train, you will have fares. For example, you have the first class and the second class. So let's imagine that we want to select the first class on the first train. So by doing that, it has changed my my front end. You can see here in the selection pane, we have here the space train I have selected. But that selection is not complete yet. That's why you cannot click on book, because this is a round trip. So I have to select an inbound train. This is basically why here the URL is changed. And now we can select one of the inbound, which is compatible with the outbound we just have selected. So let's do that. Okay, so now my selection is complete, and that's why the book button, we are able to use it. Great. So now my trip is booked. So this is basically the domain we will explore today, on which I have applied that technique that will help you to bring back the business intent into your REST API. And that technique also have a really good side effect, which is purely technical. I will show you. So for example, let's analyze what's going on the network, basically, when we are looking for a space train. Okay, so here, let's do a new search. Okay, let's see what's going on the network. Okay, I just want this. So basically here, you have the requests that help the front end to retrieve the outbound train. Okay, so let's zoom a bit. So how that URL is built. So here we have a URL path named searches with a UUID. So basically it's to go to the search resource of the user. I have a subcollection named space train, on which I can apply a query parameter saying bound equal outbound, because I just want only the outbound train on that page. Because in that list, you can have both outbound and inbound space train, right? So for the rest of the demonstration, we will go now inside Postman, because it will be easier to see what's going on the network. So here I will perform a search, and now one-way search, sorry, and I will try to retrieve the outbound trains. So you can see this is exactly the same request. And here I have all the outbound train. Okay, so let's imagine now my product owner said to me that, okay, Julian, now we will make some evolution because now we will open the Mars market. And with the Mars market, now we will have a new feature, which is the multi-destination. So it means that you are able to do travel from the Earth to the Moon, then going to Mars and going back to Earth. So it means that you can have several journeys in the same travel, in the same trip. So it also means that the concept of outbound and inbound does no longer mean anything in that kind of things. So I'm asked to change my backend for that particular feature. So here, this is the backend. Okay, so it has been developed in Kotlin and Spring Boot, but never mind if you don't know those languages or framework, because it's just the concept which is really important for us. But basically, so I have to change my API, right? Because now we no longer want any concept of outbound and inbound, and we'll change that for journeys. So I just have to find back where this is in the code, and it should be there. Okay. So basically, this is the controller that helps the front end to retrieve the space train. And you can see here, there's a request parameter bound. As we have seen, it's enumeration, and you can set outbound or inbound. So now I will change that because I'm asked to do that. And now we'll use a journey index. Okay, so when this is 0, it will be equivalent to the outbound, and 1, it will be equivalent to the inbound. And if we are in a multi-destination, we'll have how many journey index we want, starting from 0, okay? So 0, it's Earth to the Moon, 1 is the Moon to the Mars, and 2 is Mars going back to Earth, for example. So I won't do the whole feature modification, but I will just internally convert back that journey index to a bound. Okay. Just to go faster. Okay. And I just have another, sorry, I have some trouble with the IntelliJ. It's there. Okay. Okay, so now I should be able to recompile my backend. So what's the impact of what I just have done? Sorry, I may have some trouble. Okay, it's normal. It should be there. Okay, so let's, sorry for that little bug. So what's the impact of that modification? So here I have changed my API, right? So it means that my consumers should be impacted. And to simulate that, let's go back to Postman. So I have to perform a search first. Okay, search is still working. And then I would like to retrieve an outbound train. So it used to be bound equal outbound, right? So if I try that, it's no longer working, but this is expected, right? So it means that we have impacted our consumers. And here I also have an error messaging. There's a required parameter named journey index, and this is not present. So it means that all the consumers, so the front ends and so on, will have to change the request as well, because we have changed that on the back end. So it will be journey index instead of outbound, and here it will be 0 to retrieve the outbound. And this is working, right? So what we just have demonstrated is that if you change the URL of the request parameter of your API, you will break your consumers. But maybe you know that already. The thing is, this is not the main part of that demonstration. Let's take a look about my front end, which is still up and running. So the front end is there. So it has been developed in JavaScript with React. And here I have an NPM process where the front end is running. And I think you quite agree that I never changed any piece of code in JavaScript, and I didn't restart it my front end. So let's see what's going on the front end since we have made that modification. Okay, so let's try it. So I have to perform a new search. Okay, and after that, when I will hit the search button, it will load the outbound space train page. So do you think it will work or not? It still works, which is weird because we have changed the API. So let's see what's going on the network. So you will see here that in fact, my frontend was smart enough to change the URL itself and change the request. He has detected that now it no longer use bound equal outbound. It should be replaced by journey index equals 0. And I don't have made any change on the front end side. So this is basically one of the technical good side effects we will have with that technique that will help you to bring back the business intent inside your APIs. So if you want to see how it works, we will have to go deeper in the demonstration. So now we will see how to craft domain-driven design web APIs. So for me, we have everything already in REST to do such things. But there is 4 main problems that prevent people from doing that. The first one is we have false beliefs regarding REST. Let me explain you why. So let's imagine we have that particular feature inside the backend. So here it helps someone to book some space train from a selection made by the user. So the selection is inside the search. That's why we are from the selection of search, and it will create a booking, right? So I would like to ask you, usually if you have to map that kind of feature on REST, what will you use as an HTTP method and as a URL? So basically, people on that case will do such thing. So if we use a post, they will use a post because post means create. So we will create a booking. So that's a new booking from the selection. And then there's that nomenclature that most people are using that will name all the URLs according to the resource or the collection of resource. So basically they will do post on /bookings. Great. Okay, so that's working. But let's imagine now there is another way to create some booking on our application. Let's say that you can rebook a previous space train, but at another date, because you know that you have exactly the same train departing every Friday at the same schedule. So you don't want to perform a whole search. You just want to say, okay, I want that train, but in 2 months. So let's say that this is a rebooking. So it takes as a parameter an existing booking ID and a new date, and it will book. It will create a new booking at a new date. So it won't modify the existing booking. It will create a new one from the data of the previous one with a new date. So what will use people in that case has an HTTP methods and HTTP URL. Usually they will also use post bookings because in that case, you are also creating a new booking. But here we have a smell, right? Because we have 2 different requests with 2 different intents, but with the same HTTP method and same URL. So the only thing we have to make the difference will be with the payloads in that case, because in the first one, okay, since we want to book from the selection inside a search, we just have to put the search ID inside the payload. So here you can see that we have the problem we said at the very beginning was a loss of notions with that impedance mismatch, because we don't see the business intent of the user. The user wants to book what he has selected, and here you have just post booking on search ID. So create booking with that search ID. So you can see there's a loss of information. And in the second use case, when you want to rebook, we have a semantic confusion with the previous use case, because we have exactly the same endpoint regarding REST with the same HTTP method, but the intent is totally different from the user. In that case, you want to rebook the same terminal as a new date. So that's a smell. So what people are doing to fix that kind of problem? So usually in the second use case, they will do post rebookings. So it may work, okay? Because now we have a different intent. In that case, we want to rebook. In the previous one, we just want to create a new booking. It can work, but unfortunately, in my specific use case, that's not the best way to do that. Let me explain you why. Because rebooking, if you ask the business experts, for them, this is an action and not an entity. Let me explain you why. In fact, once creating a booking, if it comes from a rebooking or a booking from a section, it's exactly the same thing. We don't want to make any difference. It has exactly the same life cycle. So if you say you have a resource booking and another resource which is rebooking, it sounds like they are not the same things, but in fact, they are. And the only things that push us to make that difference is because of REST. And REST is a technology. It should not lead you regarding the design of your business domain. If you are doing domain-driven design, this is basically a bad practice. And maybe if you change the technology for communication, you change for GraphQL, or maybe you change for a message broker, you won't have that problem. So that's a big mistake, to change your business domain depending on the technical layer you're using. So what we can do in that case? So sorry, I forgot to mention that rebooking is something pseudo-functional. So that's accidental complexity, because when you will say that in your company, maybe the business expert will start to think that this is actually something different, because it sounds like functional and not technical, you see? So it can be really confusing, and you should avoid that. So to fix that problem, I'm proposing you to do exactly what the user wants to do. So the user, if you analyze his workflow, if he wants to rebook an existing booking, he will go on the booking he wants to rebook. So let's go to the booking he wants to rebook by doing bookings with the ID of the previous booking. And then I will add in the URL what we call a classifier in REST, which is /rebook. With that, you know exactly what is the intent of that URL, right? And because this is REST, I still have to conform with the uniform interface. So it means that all my URL, I should be able to perform some part of the CRUD. It's not mandatory to implement all the letter of the CRUD, but if I want to create something from that URL, it should be a post. So that's why here we have a post. In the URL, in the content, in the payload, we just have to pass the new date. As a result, we will have a new booking with a new ID and a new date. It has exactly the same structure than the other booking. And it will be exactly retrieved like any other booking with the get endpoint. Okay, so it means that now we are aligned with what the business experts want. There's two ways to create a booking, from the selection and from the rebooking process. But once created, this is exactly the same thing. We don't want to make any difference. And that proposition is actually solve the best that kind of situation. So maybe this is something that is a bit irritating from some people because they heard that we cannot use verbs in REST, right? So you have to know that this is a false debate. If you take a look at the thesis of Roy Fielding when he created REST, he doesn't say anything about that. The only thing you can't do is to put inside your URLs verbs that is at odds with the meaning of the HTTP method. For example, get is to retrieve some data, not create any data. So if you have an HTTP get on a URL which is /create, that's confusing. So we don't know what will do that endpoint. So that's the only thing you can't do. Otherwise, you can do everything you want with the URL. You can put opaque URL if you want. And furthermore, Roy Fielding go further. He said that at no time, the server or the client software need to know or understand the meaning of URL. It should not know how it was created. Wow. But we all do that, right? Each time we create a front end and we have to call a backend, we are crafting the URL. We know that, okay, I want to retrieve my selection. So the selection is in the search. So I should do get/search/the ID of the search. And since I want the selection, I will like concatenate /selection. So I will retrieve it, right? We all do that. But Roy Fielding said, you should not do that kind of stuff. But how we will do? Because we have to know which URL we have to call. So I will show you how we will do that. But you have to know that if your client software doesn't know how is built the URL, this is one of the secret of the magic trick of the technical good side effect I showed at the beginning. So to explain you how we can proceed, I need to explain first another problem that usually we make the confusion between the model and the business. When we create APIs, what does it mean? You'll see it's quite easy, in fact. So let's talk about the business. The business is actually what the user is doing, right? So when she wants to select a train with a fare, she's going on the space train page and she clicks on the fares of the space train she wants. So that's basically the business, right? The workflow, the business, everything. But on the software side, we have the model. The model is how we model the business. So basically here I have a search resource. Inside it, I have an available space train list. And you will find in that all the inbound and the outbound space train that complies with the criteria of the user. I also have a sub-resource selection in which I will store all the selected space train, only their train numbers. That's one way to model that problem, that business problem. But I could have done something else. I could have removed that selection sub-resource and put some booleans on the space train saying, okay, this one has been selected, this one is not selected, right? We can do both, okay? So it means that the way we are modeling the business is implementation, right? But the problem is that when we want to expose that service to the user, we will map it as it in REST. So for example, if you want to select a space train, you will do a breakdown of the structure of your implementation in the code. For example, here you have to go in the search, so search is /ID, to find the selection. And because this is here a modification, it will be a patch. So patch is like put if you don't know it. And it means that here, once again, we have lost some business intent because what wants to do the user is to select a train on a fare. she don't want to update her sub-resource selection inside the search resource. By the way, if I change that model for Booleans inside the space train, instead of having a sub-resource selection, it will change the URL, right? So it really means that this is implementation details and not the business intent. So in the worst case, when you build API like that and you don't have UX researcher and the domain is quite complicated, you can build a user experience on top of wrong APIs, and that will be really painful for the users. So don't worry, it's quite unusual. But most of the time, this is what we have in the best case, a really nice and beautiful front end and an ugly backend. Why? Because the front end has to comply with the business, right? With the business intent. If you don't display the right way how to select a train, the user will get mad, okay? You can't say, okay, update sub-resource selection inside the search. This is not what you expose to your user, right? So it means that the front end will make that translation from the business intent and the workflow of the user to the API of the backend, which is a bit technical and ugly, that say, okay, update the sub-resource selection there. And that thing is something that will be replicated on all the consumers of your backend, if you have mobile application, desktop application, and so on. So here we have what I call an accidental complexity of adaptation, because we expose our model to our consumer instead of our business intent. So how to fix that? We will take that model and we will encapsulate that inside the backend. And instead of exposing the model, we will expose behaviors. That basically what we do in object-oriented programming, you know, by encapsulating states and exposing behaviors, right? But that's quite easy to say, because if you take a deeper look with REST, there is a big problem with encapsulation. Let me explain you why. So if we talk about encapsulation, for example, here I have an example. So this is Kotlin, but it looks like Java. An example where there is no encapsulation at all. So in that class search, I have all the states, I mean, all the attributes with the ID, the criteria, the space train, and the selection. And I can do a get and set on each of those attributes. And that's the only thing I have here. So basically, that's not object-oriented programming, because I don't have any behaviors here. It means that if I want to change a criteria, I will have to do a set criteria. Okay, but it may have an impact on the other attribute of the search. For example, you made some travel between I don't know, London and Amsterdam, and so it means that your criteria goes from London to Amsterdam. And it means also that all the trains are departing from London and going to Amsterdam. But let's say that you change your mind and now you want to go to Paris. So you do a set criteria and change the arrival station to Paris. If you do only that, it means that your search will be in inconsistent state, because the criteria say that you're going from London to Paris, but you still have the trains from the previous search that say that it goes from London to Amsterdam, right? So it means that all the business logic will have to be done on all the consumers in the code that are using the search object. So that's why we call that a bad practice. And Martin Fowler called that also an anemic domain, because you don't have any business rules or business logic attached to the search object. It will be deferred to search manager, search util, search service, and everyone will have to do defensive code because you cannot be sure in which state is the search, either consistent or an inconsistent state. So OOP, so object-oriented programming, said we will stop that, and now we will encapsulate the state and expose behavior. This is also something that we do with domain-driven design. So it means that we no longer have any setters. And instead of that, we will expose all the modification as transition of behaviors. So for example, you want to select a train with a fare, you have a method for that. You want to change the arrival station, okay, you will have a change criteria function. And that change criteria, if you change the arrival train station, it will empty the train list, for example. So it means that the search will remain in a consistent state. So I don't know if you are doing that, but it's one of the main principles of oriented programming, the encapsulation. And this is something that we do also with domain-driven design. So maybe you have pushed effort into that. But once you are going back to REST, the only thing you can do is to serialize only the states of your search, right? So all the fields. But what's about the function? The function is there to expose behaviors, but we no longer have it, right? So it means that with REST, we de-encapsulate the behaviors to expose states. We are doing exactly the opposite things that object programming said that we should do, right? Which is a best practice. So it means that now our API is anemic because the only thing we can do is to do getter setters on each field using the uniform interface of REST with get, patch, post, and so on. So we can ask ourselves if we are not a bit mad once again. Because if you think about it, we have a backend. In that backend, on one side, you have the REST API, which is a CRUD-based API. On the other side, usually you have a database. If you know SQL or NoSQL, that's basically CRUD as well. And in between, we want to put some domain business, which is object-oriented programming, which is not CRUD-based. But why are we doing that? It's maybe too expensive to do all those translation into CRUD on white side to change that once again. So maybe we can put a dynamic domain, which is CRUD only. And if we do that and everything CRUD in the backend, maybe we can simplify all the things once again and say, let's get rid of the backend and use Postgres REST, which will expose directly our tables in REST. Okay, on top of the SQL language. Why we are not doing that? But because we have complex business logic to implement. Doing that in SQL is way complicated. Doing that, so it means that we still have to put in the backends that business logic. So it means also that we have to find a way to keep that logic, even if we expose that on the REST layer. So maybe I didn't define well what is CRUD now. So you have to know that CRUD means also completely ridiculous and useless domain-driven design, if you know what domain-driven design is. So that's a troll, basically. That's a joke. So one example of the encapsulation, that's quite easy to see. Remember when we had two ways to book, with the booking from the selection and booking at a new date. And we were both using post booking at that time. So the only way to make the difference was using the payload, right? So in the first case, search ID, okay, I know that inside the search I have the selection. So this first one is to book a new, to create a new booking from a selection. The other one, you have a booking ID in the payload. So maybe this is a rebook. So here you have to read the payload to deduce the use case. So basically, That is one of the loss of sense through the encapsulation. So now we'll see how to fix all those problems we have seen. Okay, so the first thing is to once again be aligned with what the user is doing. So the user is selecting one fare on the train she wants. So remember, on the backend, we said, okay, usually people are just aligning the API regarding the structure of the code. So basically, this is what you will see. You will see a patch, which is like a put on search/id selection. And in the payload, because here I'm using JSON patch, which helps you to do atomic modification on REST. It says that the operation is add on the past selected space train with the value, train number, and fare. So it means that, okay, what is in value will be put in the sub-collection selected space train. Okay. So here we have two problems. The first one is that we have accidental complexity of adaptation with the URL, because the front end, we have to map once again the business intent into that URL, which is there is no business intent. And the second thing is the encapsulation, because I'm quite sure that you all had to take some time to understand what was meaning the payload, right? So that's not direct. You have to put some cognitive load here. So that's one example of the encapsulation. So if we want to fix all those, this is the proposition I'm making. So let's do exactly what the user is doing. So currently she is in her search. So let's go to search and the ID of the search. She wants to select what? A space train with a fare. So, okay. So let's go in the space train she wants inside the search, space train / number, and the code of the fare she wants to select, fares / select. And with the trick we have seen already with the /select, it's quite easy to say, okay, what is the intent of that URL? And here, I'm quite sure that in one look, you all know what is supposed to do that URL. And that was not quite easy with that one, because that one is way more technical, complicated. I could have selected a sit option as well with the same URL, but with another payload. But here, that is crystal clear what we have to do, right? What is supposed to do that endpoint. I'm still using here the uniform interface because I'm creating a selection, it will be a post. So with that, we'll be more aligned with what the user is doing. But maybe there is a question on your side now. So first, you have to know that it won't change anything on the domain model on the backend, because the adaptation will be done by the controller. So the controller will do the translation that the consumers had to do before, you know, the translation between, okay, so because I say that I'm selecting a fare inside a space train, it means that I will have to put the IDs in selected space train. That will be done on the backend. Okay, that's no longer done from the front end side. But remember, I said that, okay, so we have better URLs, but I said that the front end should not know how to build the URLs. So how can he call the URL if he doesn't know how to build it? That's weird, right? So let's see how to do that. So the last problem that prevent us from doing business-oriented APIs is that we have anemic APIs regarding the workflow. Let me explain you that. So here, this is a little event storming that displays all the steps of a one-way search, and in the bottom, a round-trip search, okay? So usually, if you want to map that in REST, you will use the corresponding endpoints, right? So the first thing I'm doing is I'm creating a search by posting my criteria. After that, I will retrieve the outbound train. Okay, bound equal outbound. Then I will select one of the train. After that, I will be able to get the inbound train, and then I will select one of them. And because now my selection is complete, I've selected an outbound and inbound train, I'll be able to create my booking. Okay, nice. But I have a question for you. How do we know that we must proceed in that order? If we look at the API, that's not easy to understand. You have to first know the domain business and know how is built the backend. So usually what people are doing, maybe they use Swagger to document, they say, okay, after that endpoint, you can call this one. But that's not convenient. And furthermore, what is preventing the front end from displaying the inbound train before the outbound ones? He knows all the URLs usually. So it means that he can do that technically, right? What is preventing the front end from trying to retrieve the inbound train for a one-way trip? It doesn't mean anything, but technically it can try. It will have an error, but it can try. And also what is preventing the front end from calling the booking creation endpoints, although the selection is not yet complete. It can do all those things, but it doesn't mean anything, right? Those workflows are not valid. And nothing is preventing the front end to do that because our API are anemic regarding the workflow. Only the front end is implementing the business workflow. Usually it's not inside the backend. So that's weird because usually we want to put all the business intent, all the business logic inside the backend. But here, some part of the business logic is inside the front ends. For example, the business workflow. And this is something that will be also duplicated for all the consumers regarding the, for example, the mobile application and so on. A good example of that is that if you want to perform a round trip on the front end and you want to display the booking button, you will display the booking button by checking if the outbound train is selected and the inbound train is selected. Here, this is basically business logic, right? And that will be on the front end. So with multi-destination, because now we will have several journeys, you will have to change that logic to handle the new use case in your front end. So it really means that here we have a leak of business logic. So to fix all those, we will now encapsulate the workflow inside the API. Okay, but how we can do that? We said that there is an encapsulation problem with REST. I don't know if you know the Richardson maturity model. It says that we can categorize all the REST API on 4 levels. The first one, you are not REST. The second one, resources. It means that you have organized your REST APIs on resources. Then you use HTTP verbs to handle the lifecycle of those resources. Basically, you are mapping post, get, read, delete on the CRUD. And most of the time, people are stopping there. But it exists something else in REST, which is the hypermedia control from the really beginning of REST. And this is where we will find how to fix all those problems. So the hypermedia control is also called HUS for hypermedia as the engine of the application state. And I really like the engine of application state because it sounds like behavior management. And what is HUS? This is a linking system, so using URL, that allows you to expose the relationship between the domain object, discover the domain, and encapsulate the business workflow. And I will show you how it works. So let's go back to Postman here. So here I have the request to create a one-way search. So you can see here the URL is quite easy. It means that I want to create a search. Okay, great. Here you have the payload for the request. I have to specify the ID of my departure spaceport, the ID of my arrival spaceport, and the departure schedule. So if I send that to the backend, usually what will do the backend? It will create a search resource in which it will put all the information of the search. So it will inline the ID, the criteria, all the possible space train from outbound and inbound ones, and the selection. But if you take a look on my version, you will see here in the response, we have the criteria, but that's all. You can see here the content of the selection or the content of all the space train. Instead of that, we have links. And each links has a functional name, for example, selection, with a URL here. So it means that from a consumer point of view, if you want to go to the selection, you take that URL as it, and you apply the uniform interface. So if you want to read it, you do a get. So I'm clicking on that. By default, here Postman will do a get. And I'm sending the request. And now I have the content of my selection. So you can see here, I have no space train in the selection. How can I see that I'm currenting the selection? In that nomenclature, this is a norm. You have always a self link, which will point to the actual resource. So you can see in the URL that self is on the selection, right? You can also see that here I have a link named search. So it means that if I want to go back to the search, I have to take that URL as it and do a get on that. And I'm back to the search. So with that, you are able to discover all the business concepts and how they are linked together. And you're able to navigate through the API with those links. But we can do better things. For example, here, if you remember, I want to display all the outbound trains. So instead of letting the front crafting the URL, I'm saying, if you want to retrieve the outbound, you just have to call that URL. Don't bother with how the URL is built, but just take that link. So that's semantic, right? So it won't change because that's business. It will change if the business say, okay, we no longer want any outbound. But if this is business, it will stay. But the URL, you don't take a look at it. You will just have to request it. So that's why when I changed the URL with bound equal outbound, it doesn't have any impact on my front end because the front end doesn't look into the URLs. You know that this is the URL he has to call, he calls that. So you can see that the URL is built by the backend, right? So the front end just have, the consumer just have to navigate through those URL. With that here, I'm now in this outbound space train. You can see it here. And you will also see that on the fares on the space train, for example, the first class, here I have a select endpoint, link. So it means that if you want to select that fare on that train, you just have to request here. So because here it won't be a read of information, but I will create a selection, I will have to comply with the uniform interface, it will be a post. So by doing that, now you will see that the self is on selection. So now I'm inside the selection. In the selection, I have the outbound train with a total price. And since my selection is now complete, if you remember at the beginning, there's no train in the selection, I have a new link say create booking. So it means that the backend was able to detect that my selection is complete. And it decided to serialize in the response that link. So thanks to that, I can build front end like this. So for example, to display the booking button, so this is in the selection, this is the booking button with the book here. I just have to make sure that the link exists. If the link does not exist, it means that I'm not in a state where I can book. So it will simplify really the front ends. Great. So if I want to book, I just have to take that URL. Because I want to create a booking, it will be a post. And I have created that booking. So you can see that the self is on bookings with a new ID. So with that, I'm able to drive the front end from the back end and playing with URLs. When I'm not able to book, the URL is not there. When I'm able to book, the URL is there and serialized by the backend. So I don't have time here to make a demonstration on the round trip, but that's basically the same things. And you can see that, for example, when I was selecting, for example, a train, you have additional parameters there, like reset selection. This is something you don't have to bother with. This is a concern of the backend. So he put in the URL what he needs, okay, and if it's guaranteed that if you call that URL, everything will go well. Okay, so it also means that if the backend wants to change the URL after, it won't have any impact on the front end. So let's go back to the presentation. So the links, this is something that the front end must not try to understand how it was formed. And it offers you a better decoupling between the consumption and the implementation of the domain model, because the URL is implementation, but the name of the link is functional. So the REST impedance mismatch we had at the beginning, it was related to false beliefs on REST nomenclature because we thought that we cannot use verbs, but verbs enrich the semantic of the API. The only thing you can't do is to use verbs at odds with the HTTP method, as I said, like get create. We had a straight exposition of our model in the API. That's a mistake because that's implementation. Instead, we should create a consumption-oriented adaptation on the backend. So to expose that as to change the URL and be aligned with the business intent instead of the structure of the code. Exposing the state of the domain object, okay, by saying the only thing I can serialize is all the fields, but now you know that we can do some encapsulation of behaviors by attaching the behaviors to the right object in the API using ATOS with the select, for example. And we had a lack of workflow definition on the backend, on the payloads. And now with A2Fs, we are able to drive the workflow from the API by showing or hiding some links. Okay, now you're able to book, you have the create booking link. Otherwise, you will have to perform other operations like selecting the inbound. This is something I didn't show here because we made only a one-way trip. And with all those, you will get back all the business intent inside your APIs. So thank you very much. You can scan that QR code to get the repository of the demonstration. I hope that you learned something today.
Thanks a lot, Julian. Extraordinary session. Really, really interesting because, REST APIs seem like such well-trodden ground, right? So, you go into this webinar thinking you'll only learn a little. I mean, this is amazing. I mean, the material that you covered over the last 60 minutes has been extraordinary, and it really is interesting to kind of really see how, I mean, the whole maintainability thing, improves with this, domain model. So thanks a lot for doing this session. So I've got several questions on YouTube, but then some I have, we have time for just one. So that is, if one has to start refactoring existing APIs that are not done in the domain model, what advice would you offer to them? Or is it something that we have to try only in a new project? So that's a question.
Okay, so the thing that I will try to do first is to analyze the workflow of your API, because that's the main, I think what is the most important. And before maybe changing your URLs, you can start by including the links. And because with that, you say, okay, I will make an abstraction of the URL, and now that will be links. And I will start to change the front end to use the links. And after that, I will change the URLs if I need to change the URLs. But what is the most important things is to analyze the workflow and to serialize that in the backend. So because you will just, in the first step, you will just add information without changing information in the payloads. So I think I will start like that.
Got it. Yeah. So yeah, thanks, Julian. And once again, on behalf of everyone who joined this webinar and on behalf of the startup community, I sincerely thank you for your time. And if everything goes well, we'll try and get you back for a repeat session.
Okay.
Yeah. So thanks a lot for your time, Julian.
Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah. Have a good day.
Thank you very much.